The hospital corridor echoed with the sound of my bare feet slapping against the cold tiles as I stumbled toward the maternity ward, clutching my swollen belly. Blood stained my yellow Ankara dress, the same one Kwame had complimented just hours before at our friend's wedding in Accra. The pain shot through me like lightning, and I knew something was terribly wrong with my pregnancy. "Nurse, please, someone help me," I screamed, but my voice seemed to disappear into the sterile walls of Ridge Hospital. What would you do if you walked in on this? Hit like if you've been betrayed, and comment below where you're watching from. My name is Adjoa Mensah, and 3 months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. Kwame and I had been together for 8 years, married for 5, living in our beautiful home in East Legon with our 6-year-old son, Kofi, and 4-year-old daughter, Adjoa. Kwame worked as a successful architect, designing some of Accra's most impressive buildings, while I managed our online clothing boutique from home. The diagnosis of cervical dysplasia during my 3rd pregnancy had shaken us both. The doctor explained it wasn't cancer yet, but it required careful monitoring. With proper care and regular checkups, everything should be fine, Dr. Asani had assured us. Kwame held my hand that day, promising he'd be there through everything. But promises, I learned, are as fragile as morning dew in the Ghanaian sun. The night everything changed started beautifully. We were at my cousin Ama's wedding reception at the Labadi Beach Hotel. The live band played high-life music, and couples swayed under the stars. Kwame looked handsome in his white kaftan, and despite my growing belly, I felt beautiful in my golden Kent-inspired dress. "I need to step outside for a business call," Kwame whispered during the dancing. "These South African investors won't wait." I nodded, understanding. His architectural firm was bidding on a major project in Cape Town. Success meant financial security for our growing family. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. The band announced the last dance, and still no Kwame. Worry crept into my chest like a cold wind from the Atlantic Ocean. "Adjoa, have you seen Kwame?" Ama approached, her white gelly slightly askew from dancing. "He stepped out for a call," I replied, scanning the crowd for his familiar tall frame. "A call." Ama's expression shifted. "But I just saw him in the parking lot with." She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening with horror. "With who, Ama? Who was he with?" Maybe I was mistaken," she stammered, but the pity in her eyes told me everything. I pushed past the celebrating guests, my pregnant belly making movement difficult. The night air hit my face as I stepped onto the hotel's palm-lined driveway. Luxury cars filled the lot, their owners celebrating inside. That's when I saw our silver Camry. And that's when my world exploded into 1,000 pieces. Through the slightly fogged rear window, I could make out 2 figures. One was unmistakably Kwame. I'd know the shape of his broad shoulders anywhere. The other was a woman, her long braids cascading over the seat as she moved against him in ways that made my stomach lurch. My hands trembled as I moved closer, each step feeling like walking through quicksand. The woman's face came into view as she turned, and my heart stopped. Efua, my own sister. The sister I'd helped put through university. The sister who lived in our guest room while she got back on her feet after her divorce. The sister who helped me with my children, who ate at my table, who knew about my medical condition. I stood frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then rage, hot and consuming, flooded through my veins. I banged on the car window with both fists. "Kwame, Kwame." The figures inside scrambled apart. Kwame's panic face appeared at the driver's side window, his shirt disheveled, his expression cycling rapidly from shock to guilt to something that looked almost like annoyance. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his clothes with the casual confidence of a man who'd been caught but wasn't particularly sorry about it. "Adjoa, this isn't what." "Don't." My voice came out as a growl I didn't recognize. "Don't you dare insult my intelligence." Efua emerged from the other side of the car, her red lipstick smeared, her own Ankara dress, one-eyed botter, wrinkled and twisted. She couldn't meet my eyes. "Sister, please let me explain." "Sister." I laughed, but it sounded more like a wounded animal's cry. "You think you can call me sister after this?" The parking lot seemed to spin around me. Other wedding guests had begun to notice the commotion, gathering at a distance like vultures circling carrion. How long? I demanded, looking between them. How long have you been betraying me? Kwame sighed, running his hands over his face. Adjoa, we need to discuss this privately. How long? Each word came out like a bullet. 6 months, Adjoa whispered. 6 months. While I'd been dealing with my diagnosis, with the fear and uncertainty, with taking care of our children and running our business, my husband had been sleeping with my sister. For 6 months. I'm pregnant, I said, my hand instinctively moving to my belly. I'm carrying your third child, and this is what you do. About that, Kwame said, his voice taking on a coldness I'd never heard before. We need to talk. Something in his tone made ice form in my chest. What do you mean about that? The dysplasia, Adjoa. The medical bills, the uncertainty, the possibility that you might need surgery after the birth. He shrugged as if discussing the weather. I can't handle it anymore. The world tilted. You can't handle it? I need a woman who's healthy, who can give me strong children without complications, who doesn't come with medical drama. The cruelty in his words hit me like physical blows. This was the man who'd promised to love me in sickness and in health, who'd held me while I cried about the diagnosis, who'd told me everything would be fine. Medical drama? I repeated numbly. Adjoa understands what I need, he continued, and I watched my sister nod beside him like an obedient dog. She's young, healthy, and she doesn't come with baggage. Baggage. My voice rose to a shriek. Your children are baggage? Your wife's health condition is baggage. I'm filing for divorce, Kwame announced as casually as ordering breakfast. I want you and the children out of the house by Monday. The parking lot went silent except for the sound of waves crashing against Labadi Beach in the distance. Even the wedding guests who'd been whispering stopped to stare. You're throwing me out? While I'm pregnant. With your children. My lawyer will contact you about custody arrangements, he said, already turning back to the car. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Adjoa. That's when the first contraction hit. The pain doubled me over, and I felt warm liquid running down my legs. Not blood this time, water. Something's wrong, I gasped, reaching out instinctively for Kwame. He looked at me with disgust rather than concern. Don't try to manipulate me with fake medical emergencies. This isn't fake. I screamed as another contraction seized me. The baby's coming early. But Kwame was already getting back in the car with my sister. The engine started, and I watched in horror as they drove away, leaving me collapsed in the parking lot of the Labadi Beach Hotel, 7 months pregnant and going into premature labor. Someone call an ambulance. Amma shouted, finally running to my side. As the pain overwhelmed me and darkness crept in around the edges of my vision, I made a promise to myself and my unborn child. If we survived this night, Kwame would pay for every moment of humiliation he'd put me through. He had no idea what he'd just unleashed. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping stories like this. What do you think happens next? Comment below. The fluorescent lights of Ridge Hospital's emergency room buzzed overhead as I drifted in and out of consciousness. Voices swirled around me like echoes in a tunnel. Nurses speaking rapid Chui, doctors barking orders, machines beeping with increasing urgency. BP is dropping, someone said in English. We need to get her to surgery now. Where's the father? Another voice asked. The question pierced through my haze of pain medication. Where indeed was the father of my child? Probably in bed with my sister, while I fought for both our baby's life and my own. I'm here, a familiar voice said, and for a moment my heart leaped. But as my vision cleared, I saw it was my older brother, Ya, still wearing his wedding guest attire. His face creased with worry. The father, I whispered. He left me. Ya's jaw tightened, but he squeezed my hand. I'm here now, sister. You're not alone. The next hours blurred together in a kaleidoscope of surgical lights, concerned faces, and the constant fear that I might lose everything. My baby, my health, my life. The cervical dysplasia had complicated the premature labor, and the doctors worked frantically to save us both. When I finally woke up, sunlight was streaming through the hospital window. My body felt like I'd been run over by a Tiaro bus, but I was alive. Adjoa. Dr. Asante's gentle voice drew my attention. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, one of Accra's most respected obstetricians. My baby, I croaked. She's alive, Dr. Asante smiled, and I felt tears of relief pour down my cheeks. Premature, but fighting. She'll need to stay in the NICU for several weeks, but she's a warrior, just like her mother. A daughter. Another daughter. And me? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Dr. Asante's expression grew serious. The dysplasia caused complications during delivery. We had to perform an emergency hysterectomy to save your life. The words hit me like a physical blow. I can't have any more children. I'm sorry, Adjoa. But you're alive, and so is your daughter. That's what matters now. As Dr. Asante left to check on other patients, the full weight of my situation crashed down on me. I was a single mother of 3 young children, one of them a premature infant. I had no husband, no sister, no home to return to. My body would never be the same. But I was alive. And sometimes, survival is the first step toward revenge. Adjoa. You entered the room carrying a small bag. I brought you some clothes and toiletries. Mama sends her love. She's watching Kofi and Akojua. Thank you, I whispered. Yeah, I need to see my daughter. The NICU was a world of tiny warriors fighting battles too big for their miniature bodies. My daughter lay in an incubator, no bigger than a doll, connected to monitors and tubes. She was perfect, 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and when she opened her eyes, they were the exact shade of brown as mine. What will you name her? The nurse asked. I thought for a moment, looking at this precious life that had survived against all odds. Naira, I said finally. It meant blessing in Chui, because despite everything that had happened, she was exactly that, a blessing. Over the next 2 weeks, I practically lived at the hospital. Ya brought Kofi and Akojua to visit, their young faces pressed against the NICU window as they stared at their baby sister in wonder. When is Daddy coming to see baby Naira? 6-year-old Kofi asked innocently. The question was a knife to my heart. How do you explain to a child that their father has abandoned them for their aunt? That sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones who hurt you deepest? Daddy is busy right now, I said carefully. But Kofi wasn't satisfied with that answer. I want to call him. That evening, after the children had gone home with Ya, I sat alone in the hospital chair beside Naira's incubator and made the call I'd been dreading. Kwame answered on the 3rd ring. Adjoa, is this about the divorce papers? Because my lawyer. Your daughter was born, I interrupted. Silence stretched across the connection like a chasm. Is she healthy? He asked finally. And for a moment, I heard a flicker of the man I'd once loved. She's in the NICU. She's fighting for her life, Kwame. The dysplasia caused complications. I almost died. Another pause. I'm sorry to hear that. Sorry to hear that. As if I were a distant acquaintance reporting bad weather. The children want to see you, I continued. Kofi keeps asking where his daddy is. I'll try to come by soon. When? I don't know, Adjoa. This is a difficult time for everyone. Difficult for everyone. I nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. Difficult for everyone? I'm a single mother with a newborn in intensive care, no home, and no husband. What exactly is difficult for you? You know what's difficult? His voice hardened. Having a wife who's always sick, always needing medical attention, always creating drama. Efua doesn't do that. The casual cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. Efua is my sister, Kwame. She lived in our house, ate our food, played with our children. How could you both do this to me? These things happen, Adjoa. People fall in love. You can't control love. Love. I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call it when you abandon your pregnant wife and children for her sister? I'm hanging up now. My lawyer will be in touch about the custody arrangements and division of assets. Kwame, wait. The line went dead. I sat there in the sterile hospital room, listening to the steady beep of my daughter's monitors, and felt something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. Not sadness. I was beyond sadness. Not even anger, though rage burned in my veins like fire. Determination. Kwame thought he could discard me like yesterday's newspaper. He thought, because I had a medical condition, because I was vulnerable and dependent on him, he could destroy my life without consequences. He was about to learn how wrong he could be. "Don't worry, baby girl," I whispered to Naira, placing my finger against the incubator where her tiny hand pressed against the glass. "Mama is going to make sure you and your siblings have everything they deserve. And Daddy is going to pay for what he's done to us." The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Grace Osei, the most feared divorce lawyer in Accra. If Kwame wanted a legal battle, he was going to get one. The second was to my cousin Akwasi, who worked as an investigative journalist for one of Ghana's most popular online news sites. "I need a favor," I told him. "I need you to dig up everything you can find on Kwame Mensah. His business dealings, his financial records, his social media activity, everything." "This sounds personal, cousin." "It is. Very personal." "What am I looking for exactly?" I smiled for the first time in weeks, though it was not a pleasant expression. "Anything that could destroy his reputation and his business. Because I'm going to take everything from him, Akwasi. Everything he values, everything he's built, everything he thinks makes him better than me. And if I don't find anything, oh, you will," I said with certainty. "Men like Kwame always have secrets. We just have to know where to look." As I hung up the phone, I looked out the hospital window at the bustling streets of Accra below. Somewhere out there, Kwame was probably in bed with my sister, thinking he'd gotten away with a perfect crime. He'd probably already moved her into our house, into our bed, maybe even let her play mother to my children. But Kwame had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. He thought that because I was sick, because I was vulnerable, because I'd always been the supportive wife who put his needs first, that I would quietly disappear with my children and let him live happily ever after with his new woman. He was about to discover that survival had taught me something powerful. A woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. Don't miss what happens next. Like this video if you're rooting for Adjoa, and subscribe for more dramatic stories. What would you do in her situation? Comment below. 3 weeks later, I walked out of Ridge Hospital carrying Naira in my arms, her tiny body finally strong enough to face the world. But as the automatic doors slid shut behind me, reality hit like a slap from the Atlantic wind. I had nowhere to go. Y'all waited by his old Honda Civic, his wife, Akojua, beside him. Their faces carried the careful kindness of people who wanted to help but weren't sure how. "You can stay with us as long as you need," Akojua said, reaching for the baby carrier. "We've set up the spare room." I appreciated their generosity, but I also knew the truth. Y'all worked as a bank manager, and Akojua taught primary school. They had 2 children of their own and barely enough space in their modest Tima home. Adding me and 3 children to their household would strain everything. Their finances, their marriage, their sanity. "Just until I get back on my feet," I promised. As we drove through Accra's chaotic traffic, I stared out at the city I'd called home for 8 years. Everything looked different now. The towering billboards, the street vendors, the endless construction projects. It was as if I were seeing through new eyes, eyes that had been opened by betrayal and hardened by survival. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Adjoa, this is Grace Osei. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? We have much to discuss." The law offices of Osei and Associates occupied the top floor of a gleaming building in Accra's financial district. Grace herself was exactly what I'd expected. A woman in her 40s with an immaculate appearance and eyes that missed nothing. Her office walls were lined with degrees from universities in London and New York, and photos of her shaking hands with government ministers and business moguls. "Mrs. Mensah," she said, gesturing to a leather chair across from her imposing desk. "I've reviewed the preliminary documents your husband's lawyer sent over. I have to say they're quite insulting." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were the divorce papers Kwame had filed, and my blood boiled as I read through them. He wanted full custody of Kofi and Akojua, claiming I was medically unfit to care for them. He wanted to keep the house, the cars, and most of the assets, offering me only a tiny monthly allowance for child support. He was even claiming that my online boutique was solely his intellectual property, since he'd provided the initial investment. "This is robbery," I said. "It's worse than that," Grace replied. "It's character assassination. He's painting you as an unstable, sickly woman who can't provide for her children. Look at this section." She pointed to a paragraph that made my stomach turn. Kwame claimed that my recurring medical issues and emotional instability following her condition diagnosis made me unsuitable for primary custody. He suggested I needed professional help and a reduced stress environment, code words for painting me as mentally unfit. "Can he do this?" "He can try," Grace said, "but not if we fight back properly. Tell me, Mrs. Mensah, how badly do you want to win this battle?" "I want to destroy him," I said without hesitation. Grace smiled, and it was predatory. "Good, because that's exactly what we're going to do." Over the next hour, Grace outlined her strategy. We would challenge every single one of Kwame's claims, starting with his fitness as a father. A man who abandoned his pregnant wife and children for her sister clearly had questionable judgment. We would demand forensic accounting of all marital assets, including his architectural firm. And we would gather evidence of his infidelity to prove fault in the divorce. "There's something else," Grace said as I prepared to leave. "I did some preliminary research on your husband's business. His firm, Mensa Architecture, has been bidding on several major government contracts recently. Politicians are very sensitive about public perception, especially regarding family values." She let the implication hang in the air. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that a prominent architect who abandons his sick wife and newborn baby might find it difficult to maintain those lucrative government relationships, especially if the story became public." I thought about this as I rode the TRO back to Tima, Naira sleeping peacefully in my arms. Grace was right. Kwame's reputation was everything to him. His business depended on his image as a successful, reliable family man. The wealthy clients who hired him to design their mansions, the government officials who awarded him contracts, the society people who attended his gallery openings, they all expected a certain standard. What would happen if they knew the truth? That evening, as I helped Kofi and Adjoa with their homework, while Naira slept in a borrowed crib, my phone rang. The caller ID made my heart skip. "Kwame." "Hello," I answered carefully. "Adjoa, we need to talk." His voice was strained. "Can you meet me somewhere tomorrow?" "Why?" "So you can insult me again." "Please. It's about the children, and other things." There was something in his tone that made me curious. Fear, maybe? "What other things?" "Not over the phone. Meet me at the Polo Club restaurant tomorrow at lunch. 1 o'clock. The Polo Club was where Accra's elite gathered, politicians, business owners, socialites. It was also where Kwame took his most important clients. The choice of venue was deliberate. "Fine," I agreed. "But I'm bringing Grace." "Grace." "My lawyer. The one who's going to make sure you don't steal my children and leave me with nothing." Silence stretched across the connection. "Adjoa," he said finally, his voice softer than it had been in months. "I never wanted things to get this ugly. Then you shouldn't have slept with my sister and abandoned your pregnant wife." I hung up before he could respond. The next morning, I stood in front of Adjoa's bedroom mirror, trying to decide what to wear to lunch with a man who destroyed my life. I'd lost weight since the pregnancy complications, too much weight, and my clothes hung loose on my frame. But my eyes were different now, harder, determined. I chose a blue ochre dress that had always been one of my favorites, paired it with my grandmother's gold jewelry, and wrapped my hair in a matching head wrap. If Kwame wanted to meet at the Polo Club, I would look like I belonged there. Grace was already waiting at the restaurant when I arrived, looking formidable in a black suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Kwame sat across from her, and I was shocked by his appearance. He looked tired, older somehow, with dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders I'd never seen before. "Adjoa." He stood as I approached, but I didn't acknowledge the gesture. "Let's get this over with," I said, taking my seat. "What do you want?" Kwame glanced around nervously. The polo club was busy with the usual lunch crowd. Ministers' wives discussing charity galas, business moguls making deals over palm wine, society photographers capturing it all for the weekend papers. "I want to revise the custody arrangement," he said quietly. "Oh." Grace leaned forward. "Having second thoughts about claiming my client is medically unfit." "It's not that," Kwame said quickly. "It's just the children need their mother." I realize that now. I studied his face, looking for the catch. With Kwame, there was always a catch. "What's really going on?" I asked. He shifted uncomfortably, lowering his voice even further. "There have been some complications with the South African project." "What kind of complications?" "Questions about my character, my reliability as a partner." He couldn't meet my eyes. "Word has gotten out about the divorce, about the circumstances." I felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "What word exactly?" "People are saying I abandoned my sick wife and newborn baby. It's affecting my business relationships." Grace and I exchanged glances. Someone had been talking, and I had a good idea who. "So you want to revise the custody arrangement to make yourself look better?" I asked. "I want to do what's best for the children," Kwame said, but we all knew it was a lie. "Here's what's going to happen," Grace interjected smoothly. "My client gets primary custody of all 3 children. You get supervised visitation every other weekend. The house remains in Mrs. Mensa's name, along with half of all marital assets. Your architectural firm will provide spousal support of 10,000 sadies per month for the next 5 years. Kwame's face went pale. 10,000? That's impossible. I can't. You can and you will. Grace's voice was steel. Or we can continue with your original custody challenge and let the court decide. Of course, we'll need to subpoena all your business records, interview your clients about their concerns regarding your character, and possibly call your current girlfriend to testify about the timeline of your relationship." The mention of Adjoa made Kwame flinch visibly. "Think about it carefully, Mr. Mensa," Grace continued. "What's more important, preserving what's left of your reputation and business, or continuing to punish the mother of your children for having a medical condition?" As we left the restaurant, I felt lighter than I had in months. The battle wasn't over. It might never be over. But for the first time since that horrible night at the wedding, I felt like I had some power. But as Grace and I walked through the Polo Club's parking lot, I noticed someone watching us from across the street. A woman with long braids, wearing dark sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. Adjoa. She was following me. The realization sent ice through my veins. What did she want? Was she gathering information for Kwame? Or was something else going on? As our eyes met across the busy street, she quickly looked away and hurried in the opposite direction. But not before I caught the expression on her face, not guilt or shame, as I might have expected. Fear. What was my sister afraid of? And more importantly, what did she know that I didn't? Comment your thoughts on the betrayal. Do you think Adjoa is being too harsh or not harsh enough? Share this with someone who loves drama. Don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Adjoa's frightened face across the street from the Polo Club. Why would she be following me? And what was she so scared of? Naira stirred in her crib beside the bed, and I reached over to check her breathing, a habit I developed since bringing her home from a hospital. At 2 months old, she was still so fragile, so small. But she was a fighter, just like Dr. Asani had said. Just like her mother. My phone buzzed with a WhatsApp message from my cousin Akwasi. "Call me. Found something interesting about your husband." I slipped out of the bedroom quietly, not wanting to wake Yaw's family, and stepped onto the small balcony overlooking the courtyard of their apartment complex. "Akwasi," I whispered when he answered. "What did you find?" "Sister, your husband has been a very bad boy," he said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. "Remember I told you I'd dig into his business dealings? Well, I found something that could blow up his whole world." "What?" "Tax evasion. Big time. He's been underreporting his income for years, hiding money in offshore accounts, inflating business expenses. If the Ghana Revenue Authority knew about this." My heart began to pound. "How much are we talking about?" Hundreds of thousands of sadies. Maybe millions. I have copies of bank statements, fake receipts, email chains discussing how to hide money from the tax authorities. This isn't just cheating on taxes, Adjoa. This is criminal fraud. I leaned against the balcony railing, my mind racing. How did you get all this information? Kwame was quiet for a moment. Let's just say your husband isn't as careful with his digital security as he should be. And he has some very interesting email exchanges with your sister. Efua? What kind of exchanges? The kind that show she's been helping him hide assets from you during the divorce proceedings. Moving money, backdating documents, creating false business expenses. She's not just sleeping with your husband, Adjoa. She's his co-conspirator in defrauding you. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. It was one thing for Kwame to leave me for my sister. That was emotional destruction. But this was calculated, systematic theft. They hadn't just destroyed my marriage. They'd been planning to steal my financial future. There's more, Kwame continued. Some of those government contracts your husband has been winning? I found evidence of bribery. Kickbacks to officials, inflated bids, substandard materials being used while charging premium prices. This goes way beyond your divorce, sister. This could bring down some very powerful people. I felt dizzy. What do I do with this information? That depends on how far you want to take this. We could give it to your lawyer for the divorce proceedings. We could take it to the Revenue Authority. We could publish it carefully legally as part of an investigation into corruption in government contracting. Or we could use it as leverage. Make sure Kwame knows what we know and negotiate from a position of strength. I thought about Grace's words. How badly do you want to win this battle? I need copies of everything, I said. Already done. I'm sending you an encrypted file now. But Adjoa, be careful. If even half of what I found is accurate, your husband isn't just a cheating bastard. He's a dangerous criminal with a lot to lose. After we hung up, I sat on the balcony for a long time, staring at the encrypted file on my phone. Inside this digital folder was enough evidence to destroy Kwame's life completely. His business, his reputation, his freedom, it could all disappear. The thought should have made me happy. Wasn't this exactly what I wanted? Revenge for all the pain he'd caused me and the children? But as I looked back through the bedroom window at Naira sleeping peacefully in her crib, I realized this was bigger than revenge now. This was about justice. Not just for me, but for all the people Kwame had cheated and stolen from. The government workers whose salaries paid for contracts he'd overcharged for. The families who lived in buildings where he'd used substandard materials to increase his profit margins. My husband wasn't just a cheating spouse. He was a criminal who'd been hiding behind the facade of respectability while stealing from the very people who trusted him. The next morning, I called Grace and asked for an emergency meeting. This changes everything, she said after reviewing the files Kwame had compiled. This isn't just about divorce anymore. Your husband could go to prison. Good, I said without hesitation. Adjoa, I need you to think carefully about this. If we expose everything, it won't just hurt Kwame. It could hurt your children too. Their father would be a convicted criminal. They'd have to live with that stigma for the rest of their lives. I had thought about that during the sleepless hours of the previous night. Kofi and Adjoa still loved their father, despite everything he'd done. Would destroying him destroy their image of him forever? But then I remembered something Kofi had said just the day before. Mama, why doesn't Daddy live with us anymore? Did we do something wrong? My 6-year-old son thought he was somehow responsible for his father's abandonment. How long before that guilt turned into anger? How long before my children started blaming themselves for their father's choices? My children deserve to know the truth about their father, I said finally. Not all of it, not yet. They're too young. But they deserve to know that his leaving had nothing to do with them and everything to do with his own character. Grace nodded approvingly. Then we proceed. But we need to be strategic. First, we use this information to secure the best possible divorce settlement. Then, we decide whether to pursue criminal charges. There's something else, I said. I think Efua is scared. She was following me yesterday, and she looked terrified. Maybe she knows we're on to them. Or maybe she's having second thoughts about what she's gotten herself into, Grace suggested. Being the other woman is one thing. Being an accessory to tax fraud and government corruption is quite another. That afternoon, as I was feeding Naira in Yaw's living room, there was a soft knock at the door. Through the peephole, I saw a figure I recognized but hadn't expected. Adjoa. My sister stood on the doorstep looking nothing like the confident woman who'd stolen my husband. Her usual perfect makeup was smeared, her designer clothes wrinkled, and her hands shook as she clutched a small purse. "Please," she said when I opened the door. "I need to talk to you." "You have some nerve coming here," I said, but something in her expression stopped me from slamming the door in her face. "Adjoa, please. I'm scared. I think I'm in serious trouble." Against my better judgment, I let her in. She sat on the edge of Yaw's sofa like a bird ready to take flight, her eyes darting nervously toward the windows. "What do you want, Adjoa?" "I want to tell you the truth. About everything." I settled Naira in her carrier and sat across from my sister. Though after everything she'd done, could I still call her that? The truth? "You mean there's more than just you sleeping with my husband while I was pregnant and sick?" Tears began streaming down her face. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. It was never supposed to go this far." "What are you talking about?" "Kwame, he didn't just seduce me, Adjoa. He recruited me." I stared at her, not understanding. "Recruited you for what?" "To help him hide his money. From the taxes, from you, from everyone." Her voice was barely a whisper. "He said he needed someone he could trust, someone with a clean financial record who could open accounts and sign documents." "So you betrayed your own sister for money?" "No. I mean, yes, but it's complicated." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "When I got divorced from Kwame, I was broke. Completely broke. You knew that. You let me live with you because I had nowhere else to go." I remembered. Adjoa had lost everything in her divorce. Her husband had been cheating with multiple women and had managed to hide most of their assets before she could claim them. Kwame said he could help me get back on my feet. He offered me a job with his company doing bookkeeping. Legitimate work, I thought. But it wasn't legitimate. At first it was. But then he started asking me to do things, open bank accounts in my name, sign papers I didn't understand, move money around. He said it was normal business practice, that all successful entrepreneurs did it. "And you believed him?" "I wanted to believe him," she said miserably. "I was desperate, Adjoa. I had nothing. No money, no job prospects, no husband. And here was this successful, charming man offering me a way out." "So you decided to sleep with him too?" Adjoa's face crumpled. "That wasn't part of the plan. At least, not at first. But Kwame is very persuasive. He made me feel special, chosen. He said he'd never met a woman who understood him the way I did." I felt sick listening to her. While I was dealing with my diagnosis, with the fear that I might have cancer, you were falling for my husband's lies? I know how it sounds. I know how terrible it is. But by the time I realized what was really happening, I was in too deep. "What do you mean, what was really happening?" Adjoa looked around nervously again. "The money laundering, the tax evasion, that was just the beginning. Kwame has been taking bribes from government officials, skimming money from construction projects, using substandard materials in buildings that are supposed to house families. I know about all of that." Her eyes widened. "You know, I know everything, Adjoa. The question is, why are you telling me this now?" "Because I think he's going to make me disappear." The words sent a chill through the room. "What do you mean, disappear?" "Yesterday, after you met with him at the polo club, he was furious. He said you were asking too many questions, getting too close to the truth. He said we needed to take care of the problem." "What kind of problem?" "You, Adjoa. You're the problem. You know too much, and you're not backing down like he expected." I felt my blood turn to ice. "Are you saying my husband is threatening me?" "I'm saying he's desperate. And desperate men do desperate things." Adjoa leaned forward, her voice urgent. "There's something else. He's been meeting with some very dangerous people. Politicians, business moguls, even some military officers. If this corruption scandal comes out, it won't just destroy him. It'll bring down a lot of powerful people. Good. They deserve to be brought down. You don't understand. Efua grabbed my arm. These aren't people who just lose their jobs and move on. These are people who make problems disappear permanently. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You think he would hurt me? I think he would do anything to protect himself and his business partners, including making sure you never get the chance to expose them. I looked at Naira sleeping peacefully in her carrier, at Kofi and Akojua's school bags by the door, and felt pure terror wash over me. Why are you warning me? I asked. Because despite everything I've done, you're still my sister. Because I never wanted anyone to get hurt. And because... She hesitated. Because what? Because I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air like smoke. Pregnant? With his baby. She nodded miserably. 3 months. And Adjoa, he doesn't want it. He wants me to get rid of it. He says it's too complicated, too risky given everything that's happening with the divorce. So Kwame was willing to abandon another child. The pattern was becoming clear. Whenever life got complicated, whenever his responsibilities became inconvenient, he simply walked away. What are you going to do? I don't know. I can't afford to raise a baby on my own, especially not if I end up in prison as an accessory to his crimes. But I can't. She touched her still flat stomach. I can't kill my baby. For the first time since discovering their affair, I felt something other than rage toward my sister. She was trapped in the same web of lies and manipulation that had once ensnared me. The difference was, I had found a way out. Efua, I said carefully. If you really want to make this right, if you really want to protect your baby and help me protect mine, you need to do something. What? You need to testify against him. Tell the authorities everything you know about the corruption, the money laundering, the threats. Help me put him away before he hurts anyone else. I can't, she whispered. He'll destroy me. He has evidence of my involvement in everything. He could send me to prison. Grace can help you get immunity in exchange for your testimony. You'd have to admit your role, but you wouldn't go to prison if you cooperate fully. Efua was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. There's a meeting tomorrow night, she said finally, at the construction site of his new project in Tima. He's meeting with some of the government officials involved in the corruption. They're going to discuss how to handle the Adjoa problem. What time? 8 o'clock. I felt my pulse quicken. This could be the break we needed. Concrete evidence of conspiracy and possibly criminal threats against me. Can you get me a recording of that meeting? Are you insane? If they catch me. If you don't help me stop this, we're both dead, Efua. You, me, and our children. All of us. She looked at Naira sleeping peacefully in her carrier, then at me with eyes full of tears and terror. Okay, she whispered. I'll try. As she left, I immediately called Grace and Akwasi. Tomorrow night would either give us everything we needed to destroy Kwame and his corrupt network, or it would be the last mistake we ever made. But I had learned something important from my sister's visit. I wasn't the only victim in this web of lies. Kwame had manipulated and trapped multiple people, using their desperation and vulnerabilities against them. The question was, how many more victims were there? And how far would he go to keep his secrets buried? Hit like if you're on the edge of your seat. What do you think will happen at the secret meeting? Comment your predictions below, and don't forget to subscribe. The next evening, I sat in my borrowed bedroom holding Naira, trying to appear calm while my heart hammered against my ribs. Somewhere across the city, Efua was walking into what could be the most dangerous situation of her life, carrying a recording device that could either save us both or get us killed. Grace had arranged everything. A tiny digital recorder hidden in Efua's purse, with backup audio streaming to a secure server. If something went wrong, if Efua was discovered or worse, the evidence would still exist. Are you sure about this? Ya had asked earlier as I prepared to leave. This sounds incredibly dangerous. He was right, of course. But I was past the point of playing it safe. Kwame had made it clear that he saw me as a problem to be solved. And in my experience, men like him had permanent solutions for their problems. I checked my phone, 7:45 p.m. Efua should be arriving at the construction site soon. The Tima project was one of Kwame's most ambitious, a luxury residential complex that would house some of Accra's wealthiest families. The irony wasn't lost on me that he was meeting his co-conspirators in a building constructed with stolen money and substandard materials. At exactly 8 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Efua. I'm inside. Recording started. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. I paced the small room, fed Naira, checked on Kofi and Adjoa, and tried to focus on anything other than the dozen ways this plan could go catastrophically wrong. Finally, at 10:15 p.m., another text. It's done. Meeting me at the usual place. The usual place was a 24-hour chop bar in OSU where Efua and I used to eat when we were teenagers, back when she was still my sister and not my husband's accomplice. It felt fitting that this chapter of our story would end where our relationship had begun. Grace was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her laptop open. Efua came in 10 minutes later, looking like she'd aged 5 years in 2 hours. I got it all, she said without preamble, pulling the tiny recorder from her purse with trembling hands. Everything. Grace immediately connected the device to her laptop and began playing the audio. Even through the small speakers, the voices were clear and identifiable. Kwame's voice. The situation with my wife is becoming untenable. She's hired Grace Osei, and you all know what that means. An unfamiliar male voice. Osei doesn't take cases she can't win. If she's representing your wife, she must have something on you. Another voice. This one with the refined accent of someone educated abroad. We cannot allow this divorce to expose our business arrangements. Too much is at stake. Kwame again. I've been thinking about that. What if Adjoa had an accident? Nothing suspicious, of course. She's been under tremendous stress since the baby was born. Postpartum depression can lead to tragic decisions. The words hit me like a physical blow. My husband, the father of my children, was calmly discussing my murder and planning to disguise it as suicide. Grace paused the recording. That's enough to charge him with conspiracy to commit murder. But let's hear the rest. The unfamiliar male voice continued. That's risky, Kwame. Better to find another way. What about making her disappear? A trip somewhere remote, maybe to visit family in the north. I don't have family in the north, I whispered. Exactly, Grace said grimly. They're discussing kidnapping you. The third voice spoke up. There are other options. Financial pressure. Legal intimidation. We have judges who owe us favors. I've tried that route, Kwame replied. She's not backing down. If anything, she's becoming more determined. No, I think we need a permanent solution. What about the sister? Can she be useful? Efua has served her purpose, but she's becoming a liability too. She's gotten too emotional about the pregnancy, and I'm not sure I can trust her to keep quiet if things get complicated. Efua's face went white. He was planning to kill me too. The recording continued for another hour, with the men discussing specific details of government contracts, bribery amounts, and methods for hiding their criminal activities. By the end, we had enough evidence to bring down not just Kwame, but a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of Ghana's government. This is bigger than I expected, Grace said, closing her laptop. We're not just talking about divorce fraud. This is a RICO case. Organized crime. What happens now? I asked. Now we take this to the authorities. But not the local police. Too much risk of corruption. I have contacts at the Economic and Organized Crime Office. They'll want to move quickly before word gets out. What about my children? If Kwame gets arrested, if this becomes public, we'll handle it carefully. The media attention will be intense, but we can control the narrative. Kwame is the criminal, not you. You're the brave woman who exposed corruption and protected her children. As we prepared to leave the chop bar, Efua grabbed my arm. Adjoa, I know I can never make up for what I've done to you and the children. But I want you to know, when I heard him talking about hurting you tonight, I realized how far I'd fallen, how much I'd lost of who I used to be. You betrayed me for a man who was planning to murder both of us, I said. How do I forgive that? I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to do the right thing, to help you put him away and protect our children, all of our children. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, for the first time in months. Beneath the guilt and fear, I could see traces of the young woman who'd once been my closest friend. The sister who'd held my hand during thunderstorms, who'd helped me sneak out to see movies our parents wouldn't approve of, who'd been my maid of honor when I married the man who would destroy both our lives. If you testify against him, if you help convict him, then we'll see, I said finally. But Efua, if you betray me again, if you put my children at risk again, I will destroy you myself. Do you understand? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. 3 days later, Yosio agents arrested Kwame at his office in front of his employees and clients. The charges included tax evasion, money laundering, government corruption, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. I watched the news coverage from Ya's living room, holding Naira while Kofi and Adjoa played with their toys, still too young to understand that their father was now a wanted criminal. Why are there so many cameras outside Daddy's office? Adjoa asked innocently. Daddy made some bad choices, I said carefully. Sometimes when adults make bad choices, they have to face consequences. Is Daddy coming home for dinner? The question broke my heart. No, sweetheart. Daddy won't be coming home for a very long time. As the news anchor detailed the charges against Kwame, mentioning the brave whistleblower who exposed the corruption network, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. For the first time since that terrible night at the wedding, I wasn't just surviving, I was winning. But I should have remembered that in chess, the most dangerous moment is when you think you've checkmated your opponent. Because sometimes they still have one move left. My phone rang, and the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Mensah? The voice was male, professional, but with an undertone that made my skin crawl. My name is Detective Inspector Morrison. I think we need to talk. About what? About your husband's arrest. You see, there are some inconsistencies in the evidence that was presented. Some questions about how it was obtained. We'd like you to come down to the station for questioning. My blood turned to ice. Am I being charged with something? Let's just say you might want to bring a lawyer. The line went dead, and I realized that the war was far from over. Kwame might be in jail, but his powerful allies were still free, still fighting, and still very dangerous. And now they were coming for me. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for notifications. This story is getting intense. What do you think Detective Inspector Morrison really wants? Comment your theories below. Grace's law office felt like a fortress as I sat across from her mahogany desk, Naira sleeping peacefully in her carrier despite the storm brewing around us. Outside, across evening traffic honked and rumbled, but inside, the air was thick with tension and barely controlled fury. This Detective Inspector Morrison doesn't exist, Grace announced, sliding a folder across the desk. I've checked with every police station in Greater Accra. No such officer is registered with the Ghana Police Service. My stomach dropped. Then who called me? Someone pretending to be law enforcement to intimidate you. Which means Kwame's associates are getting desperate. Grace's eyes were like steel. The good news is that EOCO is moving fast. They've frozen all of Kwame's assets, including the house in East Legon. You can move back in tomorrow if you want. Is it safe? EOCO has assigned protection detail. 2 officers will be stationed outside around the clock until the trial is over. Going back to the house felt surreal. As I walked through the rooms where I'd once been happy, everything looked the same but felt completely different. The kitchen where Kwame used to make pancakes for the children on Sunday mornings. The living room where we'd watch Nigerian movies together. The bedroom where we'd planned our future and made love and created our babies. It all belonged to me now, but it felt haunted by memories of who I used to be. Mama, why are there police cars outside? Kofi asked as I helped him unpack his clothes in his old bedroom. They're here to keep us safe, sweetheart. Safe from what? How do you explain to a 6-year-old that his father's criminal associates might want to hurt his family? How do you tell a child that the man he loves and misses is not just absent, but dangerous? Sometimes when people make very bad choices, it affects other people too. The police are just making sure those other people don't bother us. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough for now. That night, as I was giving Naira her evening bottle, the house phone rang. I'd forgotten we even had a landline. Everyone used mobile phones now. But someone had found the number. Hello. I answered cautiously. Adjoa. The voice was smooth, educated, with a kind of confidence that came from years of wielding power. My name is Dr. Richard Asidu. I believe you know who I am. I did know. Dr. Asidu was one of Ghana's most prominent politicians, a member of parliament who'd been mentioned several times in Kwame's recorded conversations. He was also, according to the evidence we'd gathered, one of the biggest recipients of Kwame's bribes. What do you want? I want to have a conversation, a civilized conversation between two reasonable adults about how to resolve this unfortunate situation. The only situation is that you're a criminal who's about to be exposed. He chuckled, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Mrs. Mensah, you're obviously an intelligent woman. So let me speak to you intelligently. You have something that belongs to me, and I have something that belongs to you. I don't know what you're talking about. The recordings, the financial documents, the evidence you've compiled against your husband and his associates. His voice remained calm, but I could hear the threat beneath it. In exchange, I'm prepared to offer you something very valuable, which is your children's future. The words hit me like a physical blow. Are you threatening my children? I'm offering to protect them. You see, Mrs. Mensah, your husband wasn't the only one keeping records. I have extensive documentation of your sister's involvement in money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud. Enough to put her in prison for 20 years. My mouth went dry. Efua is cooperating with authorities. She has immunity. Immunity for the crimes we know about. But there are others. Financial transactions she was involved in before she started working with EOCO. Money she moved, accounts she opened, documents she signed. All without immunity agreements. I felt the trap closing around me. What do you want? A meeting. Tomorrow evening. Just you and me, somewhere private where we can discuss terms like civilized people. I'm not meeting you anywhere alone. Then bring your lawyer. But understand, Mrs. Mensah, this is a one-time offer. After tomorrow night, my protection extends only to those who are useful to me. Everyone else becomes expendable. The line went dead, and I stood in my kitchen holding a phone with shaking hands. Dr. Asidu had made his message crystal clear. Cooperate or watch my sister go to prison and my children grow up with their aunt behind bars. I called Grace immediately. Absolutely not, she said when I explained the conversation. This is obviously a trap. They want to eliminate the star witness against them. But what if he's telling the truth about Efua? What if there are other crimes she committed that aren't covered by her immunity agreement? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Adjoa, if you meet with this man, there's a very real chance you won't come back. So what are my options? Let Efua go to prison? Let my children grow up knowing their aunt is a convicted felon because of me? Grace was quiet for a long moment. There might be another way, but it's risky. Everything is risky now. What are you thinking? We set up a meeting, but not the way he expects. We wire you, record everything he says, and have EOCO agents positioned nearby. If he incriminates himself further, we add conspiracy and intimidation charges to his file. And if he realizes I'm recording him, that's the risk. But Adjoa, this man is never going to stop coming after you as long as you're a threat to him. The only way to end this is to gather enough evidence to destroy him completely. The next evening, I sat in my car outside the Golden Tulip Hotel in Accra, wearing a wire and trying to control my breathing. Dr. Asidu had chosen a location, a public place where he'd feel safe, but not so public that our conversation could be overheard. Grace's voice came through my earpiece. Remember, get him to admit to the bribery, the threats, and any plans to harm you or your family. The more specific, the better. I walked into the hotel's elegant lobby, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Dr. Sidhu was waiting in a corner of the bar, dressed in an expensive suit and radiating the kind of confidence that only came from decades of corruption without consequences. Mrs. Mensah, he stood as I approached, extending his hand. Thank you for coming. I didn't shake it. Let's get this over with. Please sit. He gestured to the chair across from him. Can I order you something? Wine. Coffee. I'm breastfeeding. Just water. Ah yes, the new baby. Congratulations. It must be difficult, raising 3 children alone while dealing with all this legal unpleasantness. Cut the pleasantries. What do you want? Dr. Sidhu smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Straight to business. I like that. Very well. Here's what I'm prepared to offer. You withdraw your testimony against your husband and destroy any evidence you have of our business relationships. In exchange, I ensure that your sister serves no prison time and that you receive a very generous financial settlement, enough to secure your children's futures. How generous? 5 million sadies. Cash. Untraceable. It was an enormous sum, enough to send all 3 of my children to university, to buy a new house, to never worry about money again. And all I have to do is let criminals go free. You let businessmen continue conducting business. What my associates and I do is no different from what happens in every country in the world. Politics and commerce have always been intertwined. Politics and commerce, maybe. But bribery and corruption? Planning to murder the mother of 3 children. His expression hardened slightly. Ah yes, that unfortunate conversation. Your husband does have a tendency toward dramatic solutions. But surely you understand it was just talk? Frustrated venting from a man under tremendous pressure. So you're saying he wasn't serious about killing me? I'm saying desperate men say desperate things. But actions are what matter, and no actions were taken against you. I leaned forward. Because he was arrested before he could act. Perhaps. Or perhaps because it was never a real plan to begin with. Dr. Sidhu sipped his whiskey. But let's not dwell on hypotheticals. Let's focus on your family's future. What happens if I refuse your offer? Then you continue down this path of destruction, and everyone suffers. Your husband goes to prison, your sister goes to prison, your children grow up stigmatized by scandal, and you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when the next threat will come. Is that a threat? It's a reality. Mrs. Mensah, you've made enemies of some very powerful people. People who have long memories and considerable resources. Even if you win this particular battle, the war will never end. I felt the weight of the wire against my skin and hoped it was capturing every word of this conversation. Let me ask you something, Dr. Sidhu. How many other families have you destroyed with your business practices? How many other wives have lost their homes because their husbands were paying you bribes instead of supporting their children? I don't destroy families, Mrs. Mensah. I provide opportunities for ambitious men to advance their careers. What they do with those opportunities is their choice. And the substandard materials in the buildings? The safety violations? The families who might die because corners were cut to maximize profits. His mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold and ruthless beneath the polished exterior. That's the cost of progress. Every developing economy has growing pains. Growing pains that kill people. People die every day from poverty, Mrs. Mensah. Our projects provide jobs, housing, economic growth. If occasionally someone gets hurt in the process, that's regrettable but acceptable. I stood up from the table. I've heard enough. I don't think you have. His voice turned sharp. Sit down. We're not finished. Yes, we are. He grabbed my wrist as I turned to leave. You foolish woman. Do you think this ends with a few arrests? Do you think prison stops people like me? I have associates, resources, connections you can't imagine. Your husband was small time compared to what I can do to you. Let go of me. I own judges, police commissioners, military officers. I can make evidence disappear, witnesses recant their testimony, entire cases collapse. And if legal methods don't work, he squeezed my wrist harder. Well, there are always other options. That's when hotel security appeared. having been alerted by the EOCO agents watching from across the lobby. "Is there a problem here?" the security guard asked. Dr. Asidu released my wrist immediately, his politician's smile returning. "No problem at all. Mrs. Mensah was just leaving." As I walked out of the hotel, my heart pounding but my head held high, Grace's voice crackled through my earpiece. "We got everything. Bribery, admissions, witness intimidation, threats of violence. This man just talked his way into a prison cell." But as I reached my car, I realized Dr. Asidu had taught me something important. Kwame was never the real enemy. He was just a small fish in a much larger pond, and the real predators were still circling. The question was, how many more enemies would I have to destroy before my children were truly safe? Don't forget to like and subscribe. The plot thickens. What do you think Dr. Asidu will do next? Comment your predictions and share this with someone who loves intense stories. The next morning brought news that changed everything. I was feeding Naira her morning bottle when Grace called, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "Turn on GTV News now." I grabbed the remote with one hand while balancing the baby with the other. The morning anchor's serious expression filled the screen as a banner read, "Breaking. Corruption Scandal Rocks Government. Dr. Richard Asidu, Member of Parliament for Adjoa East, has been arrested in connection with what authorities are calling one of Ghana's largest corruption scandals in recent memory. The arrests come following extensive investigations into bribery, money laundering, and conspiracy charges. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You should have taken the money." Ice ran through my veins, but I forced myself to stay focused on the news report. Additional arrests had been made overnight. 3 more government officials, 2 construction company executives, and a Supreme Court judge. The scope of the corruption network was staggering. "Mama, why are you crying?" Kofi asked, looking up from his breakfast. I touched my face and realized tears were streaming down my cheeks. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, vindication, and something I hadn't felt in months. Triumph. "I'm crying because justice is being done, sweetheart." Later that morning, as I was playing with a Adjoa in the garden while Naira napped, I heard a commotion from the street. The EOCO protection detail was talking urgently into their radios, and I could see a crowd gathering beyond the gate. One of the officers approached me. "Mrs. Mensah, we need to move you and the children inside. There are reporters and photographers outside, and the crowd is getting larger." Through the living room window, I could see the mob of journalists pressing against our gate, cameras flashing, microphones extended like weapons. They were shouting questions I couldn't make out, but their intent was clear. They wanted the story of the woman who had brought down a corruption empire. "Are we famous, Mama?" Adjoa asked, pressing her nose against the glass. "For a little while, baby. But fame isn't always a good thing." My phone rang constantly. Reporters, distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years, old friends from university wanting to reconnect. I stopped answering after the 10th call. But one call I did take was for my mother, Adjoa. Her voice was warm but concerned. "I've been watching the news. Are you and the children safe?" "We're safe, Mama. The police are protecting us." "I'm proud of you," she said, and the simple words broke something open in my chest. Your father would have been proud too. Standing up to powerful men, protecting your children, that takes tremendous courage. It doesn't feel courageous. It feels terrifying. Courage isn't the absence of fear, my daughter. It's doing what's right despite the fear. That afternoon, Grace arrived with updates that were both encouraging and concerning. The good news is that Kwame has agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. 20 years instead of life. The additional evidence we gathered on Dr. Asidu and his associates has also led to guilty pleas across the board. And the concerning news? The media attention is intense, and it's not all positive. Some outlets are painting you as a vindictive ex-wife who destroyed her husband out of spite rather than a whistleblower who exposed corruption. She showed me several newspaper headlines on her tablet. Bitter wife's revenge rocks government. Divorce drama brings down MPs. Woman scorned causes political earthquake. They're trying to minimize what you've accomplished, Grace continued. making it about personal vendetta rather than criminal justice. Does it matter? The criminals are still going to prison. It matters for your family's safety and your future. Public perception can be as dangerous as physical threats. As if summoned by her words, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Efua's name. Adjoa, you need to get out of that house. Now. My sister's voice was panicked, breathless. What are you talking about? I'm at the market, and I overheard some men talking. They mentioned your address, the children's names, when the police shift changes. Someone is planning something. My blood turned to ice. What kind of something? I don't know, but they had photos of the house, of you and the children. Professional surveillance photos. I looked out the window at the YOCO officers stationed at the gate. They looked alert but relaxed, chatting casually as they monitored the lingering reporters. Where are you now? I asked Efua. Makola Market. I followed them for a few blocks, but I lost them near the taxi rank. Adjoa, these weren't local thugs. They were well-dressed, organized. They spoke English with foreign accents. Foreign accents. That meant international connections. The corruption network was bigger than we'd realized. I'm calling Grace, I said. Stay where you are, don't come to the house. Within 20 minutes, Grace arrived with additional YOCO agents and a man I didn't recognize, tall, serious, with the bearing of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. This is Commander Asani from the National Security Council, Grace explained. The corruption investigation has revealed connections to international money laundering networks. Some very dangerous people have a lot to lose if this scandal spreads beyond Ghana's borders. Commander Asante spread several photographs across my dining table. Do you recognize any of these men? I studied the faces, all unfamiliar except one. A middle-aged white man with cold eyes and an expensive suit. I've seen him before, I said slowly. At one of Kwame's business dinners about 6 months ago. He was introduced as a potential investor from South Africa. Heinrich Muller. He's not from South Africa. He's German. And he's not an investor. He's a facilitator for international criminal organizations. Money laundering, arms dealing, human trafficking. If he's involved in your husband's network, this is much bigger than government corruption. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying my children and I are targets of international criminals? I'm saying you've exposed a network that connects to some very dangerous people who have unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. Grace leaned forward. What kind of protection can you provide? We can relocate the family immediately. New identities, new country, complete severing of ties to Ghana. Leave Ghana. The words came out as a whisper. Leave everything. It may be the only way to ensure your children's safety, Commander Asante said gently. These people don't just make problems disappear, they make families disappear. I looked around the dining room where I'd served countless meals to my children, where Kofi had done his homework every evening, where Akojua had built towers with her blocks while I nursed Nyara. This house, this country, this life, it was all I'd ever known. But as I listened to Nyara making soft sounds in her sleep upstairs, I realized that home wasn't a place. Home was wherever my children were safe. How long would we have to stay away? I asked. That depends on how quickly we can dismantle the network. Could be months, could be years. And if we don't relocate, Commander Asante and Grace exchanged glances. Then you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, Grace said. And your children will grow up in constant danger. That evening, after the children were asleep, I sat alone in my living room trying to process everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. I'd started this journey wanting justice for my husband's betrayal. Now I was contemplating fleeing my country to protect my children from international criminals. My phone buzzed with a WhatsApp message from an unknown international number. The profile photo was blank, but the message made my blood freeze. Beautiful children. It would be a shame if something happened to them. Attached were photos of Kofi and Akojua leaving their school that afternoon, taken from close range with professional equipment. I screamed. The YOCO officers burst through the front door within seconds, weapons drawn, scanning for threats. What happened? One of them shouted. I showed them the message with shaking hands. Both officers immediately made urgent radio calls while examining my phone. "We're moving you tonight," the senior officer announced. "Pack only essentials, clothes, medications, important documents. We'll be leaving in 30 minutes. Where are we going?" "Safe house first. Then Commander Asante will discuss long-term options." As I rushed upstairs to wake my children and pack our lives into a few suitcases, I felt a strange calm descend over me. The terror was still there, but underneath it was something harder, more focused. Rage. These people, Kwame, Dr. Asidu, Heinrich Muller, all of them, had not just stolen from the government or defrauded taxpayers. They had threatened my babies. They had taken photos of my innocent children and used them as weapons against me. And that was a mistake they were going to regret. "Mama, why are we leaving?" Adjoa asked sleepily as I helped her into her jacket. "We're going on an adventure, sweetheart. A very important adventure." "Can we take my dolls?" "Of course, baby. Take whatever you need to feel safe." As I strapped Naira into her carrier and gathered the diaper bag, my phone rang. "Grace, I've been in contact with Interpol," she said without preamble. "Heinrich Muller is wanted in connection with 14 separate criminal investigations across 5 countries. If we can provide evidence linking him to the Ghana corruption network, several international law enforcement agencies want to coordinate a takedown." "What kind of evidence?" "Bank records, communication logs, travel documents, anything that proves he was more than just a casual business associate of your husband's." I thought about the dinner 6 months ago, about Kwame's nervous behavior afterward, about the sudden influx of money that had coincided with that meeting. "I might have something," I said. Kwame kept detailed records of all his business meetings. If he documented his dealings with Muller, those files would be in his home office safe. "Where's the safe?" "Behind the painting of Accra's skyline." The combination is Kofi's birthday, followed by Adjoa's birthday. There was a pause. "Adjoa, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that before we run away and hide, we get the evidence needed to destroy these people once and for all." "That's incredibly dangerous. If they're watching the house, then we make sure they don't see us coming." 20 minutes later, as my children and I were driven away from our home in an unmarked EOCO vehicle, I watched the house disappear in the rear window and made a silent promise. I would not spend the rest of my life running from these criminals. I would not raise my children in fear, constantly looking over their shoulders, never able to build a real life. Instead, I would do what I'd been doing since that night at the wedding. I would fight back. And this time, I wouldn't stop until every single one of them was behind bars. The war was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. But they had made one crucial error in judgment. They had threatened a mother protecting her children. And there is no force on earth more dangerous than that. What do you think Adjoa should do next? Run and hide, or stay and fight? Hit like if your team fight back, and don't forget to subscribe for more intense chapters. Comment your thoughts below. The safe house was a modest apartment in Tima, far from the luxury of East Legon, but infinitely more secure. Commander Asani had chosen it well. 3rd floor, multiple escape routes, and neighbors who minded their own business. As I settled my children into their temporary beds, Kofi asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mama, are we ever going home?" "I don't know yet, sweetheart. But wherever we are, we're together. That's what matters." "I miss Daddy," Adjoa whispered, clutching her favorite doll. The words were like a knife to my heart. Despite everything Kwame had done, despite the corruption and the threats and the betrayal, he was still their father. They still loved him with a pure, uncomplicated love that children have for their parents. "I know, baby. It's okay to miss him." After the children finally fell asleep, I sat at the small kitchen table with Grace and Commander Asante, planning what might be the most dangerous mission of my life. "The house is under surveillance," Commander Asante reported. "We've identified at least 3 watch positions, one across the street, one in the apartment building behind your property, and a mobile unit that circles the neighborhood every 2 hours. Professional-level surveillance," Grace added. "These aren't local criminals. This is international organization." "Which means they're confident, but possibly overconfident," I said. They expect me to either run away or cower in fear. They don't expect me to come back for evidence. Because it would be insane, Commander Asante pointed out. If they catch you in that house, they won't catch me. Because I know that house better than they do. I know every creaky floorboard, every hiding spot, every shortcut through the garden. I spread out a hand-drawn floor plan of our East Legan home on the table. Kwame's office is on the second floor, but there's a service entrance through the kitchen that connects to the back staircase. If we can get past the perimeter surveillance, I can be in and out of that safe in 10 minutes. And if something goes wrong, then make sure my children are taken care of, I said simply. Grace reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Adjoa, this is madness. Let us handle it. EOCO can get a warrant. Bring in a tactical team. By the time you get a warrant, those files will be gone. Heinrich Muller and his associates aren't going to wait around while the legal system moves at its usual pace. I pulled my hand free. Besides, they're watching for law enforcement. They're not watching for a desperate mother coming home to get her family's belongings. Commander Asante studied the floor plan for a long moment. If we do this, and I want to be clear that I'm not recommending it, we do it my way. Full tactical support, synchronized timing, extraction plan ready. What are you thinking? Distraction. We create a situation that draws their surveillance teams away from a house. A fake police raid on a property 3 blocks away, complete with sirens, flashing lights, and enough drama to make them think that's where the real action is. And while they're focused on the fake raid, you slip in through the garden, get to the safe, grab whatever evidence you can find, and get out. Total time in the house, 15 minutes maximum. Grace shook her head. This is still incredibly risky. If Heinrich Muller's people realize they've been played, then I'll deal with that when it happens, I interrupted. But Grace, these files could contain evidence that brings down an international criminal network. Evidence that ensures my children never have to look over their shoulders again. At 2 a.m. the following morning, I crouched in the bush behind our neighbor's house, wearing all black and carrying an empty backpack. Through my earpiece, I could hear Commander Asante coordinating the fake police operation 3 blocks away. Target location is lit up like Christmas, his voice crackled. Surveillance teams are repositioning. You have a window. I slipped through the gap in our garden fence, the same gap Kofi used to escape to play with the neighbor's dog. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was sneaking into my own home like a criminal. The back door key was still hidden under the potted plant where I'd left it months ago. My hands shook as I unlocked the door and stepped into the kitchen that had once been the heart of our family life. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it, but covered in a thin layer of dust. Kwame's coffee mug still sat in the sink. Adjoa's drawings were still stuck to the refrigerator with colorful magnets. I forced myself to focus. Second floor. Kwame's office. The safe behind the painting. Each step up the back staircase seemed to echo like thunder, though I knew I was moving silently. The office door was closed, and for a moment I hesitated. What if someone was inside waiting? But I pushed the door open and stepped into Kwame's private sanctuary. His desk was scattered with papers. His computer still connected to multiple monitors displaying architectural blueprints. And there, on the wall behind his chair, was the painting of Accra's skyline that concealed his secrets. The safe opened easily. Kwame had always been sentimental about using the children's birthdays for passwords. Inside, I found exactly what I'd hoped for: files, USB drives, bank documents, and a leather-bound journal. I grabbed everything, stuffing it all into my backpack without taking time to examine the contents. I'd study it all later, once I was safely away. Adjoa, Commander Asante's voice crackled in my earpiece. You need to move. One of the surveillance teams is heading back toward your location. I was closing the safe when I heard it. The sound of a car door slamming in front of the house. My blood froze. Someone was here. Commander, I think I have company. Get out. Now. Use the back exit. But as I reached the top of the back staircase, I heard footsteps on the front stairs. Heavy boots. Multiple people. I was trapped. The only option was Kwame's bedroom, our former bedroom, which had a small balcony overlooking the garden. If I could get outside, I might be able to climb down the trellis that supported my climbing roses. I slipped into the bedroom and immediately felt overwhelmed by memories. The bed where we'd made love, where we'd held our newborn babies, where I'd cried myself to sleep during the worst days of my marriage. Even now, the pillows still smelled faintly of Kwame's cologne. The voices downstairs were getting closer. Male voices speaking in English with foreign accents, just as Adjoa had described. Check upstairs. Every room. I stepped onto the balcony and looked down at the garden 12 feet below. The trellis looked fragile, and I was carrying a backpack full of evidence that could bring down an international criminal network. But the alternative was facing Heinrich Muller's people with no backup and no escape route. I swung my leg over the balcony railing. Someone's been in the office. A voice called from inside the house. The safe is open. I was halfway down the trellis when I heard rapid footsteps on the bedroom floor above me. A powerful flashlight beam swept across the garden, and I pressed myself against the wall, praying the climbing roses would provide enough cover. The beam passed over me twice before moving on. I waited until I heard the men move to other parts of the house, then dropped the final 6 feet to the ground and sprinted toward the garden fence. Package is secure, I whispered into my earpiece as I slipped back through the fence. Coming home. But as I ran through the neighbor's yard toward the extraction point, I heard car engines starting behind me. They discovered my escape route. I was being hunted. Commander, they're following me. Stay calm. Keep moving toward the rendezvous point. We have backup in position. The next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. Running through darkened streets, cutting through yards and alleyways, always hearing the sound of car engines getting closer. The backpack felt like it weighed 100 pounds, but I couldn't abandon it, not when it might contain the evidence that would finally end this nightmare. I reached the rendezvous point, a 24-hour chop bar near the Tima harbor, just as an EOCO vehicle pulled up. Commander Asante threw open the passenger door. Get in. As we sped away into the night, I looked back to see 2 black SUVs converging on the chop bar we just left. 30 seconds later, and they would have had me. Did you get it? Commander Asante asked. I held up the backpack. Everything. Files, drives, documents, whatever Kwame was hiding, it's all here. Then let's hope it was worth the risk. Back at the safe house, Grace and I spread the contents of Kwame's safe across the kitchen table. What we found was even more damaging than I'd hoped. Bank statements showing transfers of millions of cedis to offshore accounts. Email chains discussing bribery schedules and kickback percentages. Photographs of secret meetings between Kwame, Dr. Asidu, and Heinrich Muller. And most damning of all, Kwame's personal journal detailing every criminal transaction, every bribe paid, every corner cut. But it was the final entry that made me gasp. Heinrich is getting nervous about Adjoa. Says she knows too much, asks too many questions. He's suggesting permanent solutions. I told him I'd handle it, but I'm not sure I can go through with what he's asking. She's still the mother of my children, even if she's become a problem. Maybe there's another way. Make her disappear without actually killing her. Heinrich says he has contacts who specialize in that kind of thing. Human trafficking networks that can make people vanish completely. I hate that it's come to this, but she's left me no choice. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. My husband, the man who'd held me while I gave birth to his children, who'd promised to love and protect me, had been planning to sell me into slavery. This is it, Grace said quietly. This is enough to bring down the entire network. International human trafficking, money laundering, government corruption. We have evidence of it all. I wiped my eyes and looked at my children sleeping peacefully in the next room. They would never have to know the full extent of their father's evil, but they would grow up safe, knowing that justice had been served. What happens now? I asked. Now we win, Commander Asante said. Completely and totally. Heinrich Muller, Dr. Asidu, your husband, and everyone else involved in this network, they're all going down. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe that this nightmare might actually end. But as I learned long ago, victories could be fleeting, and some enemies never stop fighting, even when they're cornered. My phone buzzed with another message from the unknown international number. Very impressive, Mrs. Mensah. But the game isn't over yet. Can you believe what just happened? Adjoa is such a warrior. What do you think that final message means? Like this video if you're on the edge of your seat, and subscribe for the explosive finale. Comment your predictions below. The courtroom was packed with journalists, government officials, and curious onlookers who'd come to witness what the media was calling the trial of the century. I sat in the front row between Grace and my mother, who'd insisted on flying down from Kumasi to support me. Across the aisle, Kwame sat with his legal team, looking older and more broken than I'd ever seen him. When our eyes met for the first time in months, I saw something I hadn't expected. Shame. Not remorse for what he'd put our family through, but shame at being caught. Behind him sat Dr. Asidu and 3 other government officials, all facing decades in prison. And in the defendant's section reserved for international criminals was Heinrich Muller, extradited from South Africa after a dramatic arrest that had made headlines across Africa. Judge Comfort Tedemensa, no relation to my ex-husband, presided over the proceedings with a stern dignity that had made her one of Ghana's most respected jurists. She was also, coincidentally, the first female Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, appointed just 2 years earlier. The prosecution may begin, she announced. The lead prosecutor, Attorney General Patricia Osei, Grace's older sister as I discovered, stood to address the jury with a kind of commanding presence that filled the entire courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, over the next several days, you will hear evidence of the most extensive corruption network in Ghana's modern history. A network that stole millions of cedis from the Ghanaian people, compromised the integrity of our government, and threatened the safety of citizens who dared to expose the truth. She turned to gesture toward the defendants. But most shocking of all, you will learn how one man, a husband and father, was willing to sell his own wife into human slavery to protect his criminal empire. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Even though the details had been leaked to the press over the past months, hearing it stated so plainly in a court of law was still shocking. Order. Judge Tedemensa banged her gavel. This court will maintain proper decorum. As the prosecutor outlined the case, I found myself reliving every moment of the past year. The night at the wedding, when I discovered Kwame's affair. The premature birth of Nyara, while he abandoned us at the hospital. The discovery of the corruption network. The threats from international criminals. The desperate mission to gather evidence from my own home. When Patricia called me to the witness stand, I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes watching my every move. This was it, the moment when I would tell my story publicly and officially, putting on record everything that Kwame and his associates had done to me and my family. Mrs. Mensah, Patricia, began gently. Please tell the court about the night of your cousin's wedding in October of last year. I took a deep breath and began to speak. For the next 3 hours, I recounted everything. The discovery of the affair, Kwame's abandonment, the complications with my pregnancy, the evidence of corruption I'd uncovered. I spoke about the fear I'd felt when threatened by powerful men, and the determination that had driven me to risk everything to protect my children. When I finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even some of the journalists were wiping away tears. Then came the cross-examination. Kwame's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, approached me with the predatory smile of someone who thought he could discredit a hysterical woman. Mrs. Mensah, isn't it true that you embarked on this campaign of accusations against my client out of jealousy and vindictiveness, rather than any genuine concern for justice? No, that's not true. Isn't it true that you were so obsessed with revenge against your unfaithful husband that you fabricated evidence to support these wild conspiracy theories? I looked directly at Kwame as I answered. Your client planned to have me sold into human slavery to protect his criminal activities. That's not a wild conspiracy theory. That's documented fact, written in his own handwriting. So you claim. But isn't it possible that these journal entries were created by you as part of an elaborate frame-up? Grace had prepared me for this line of questioning. The journal entries were verified by 3 separate handwriting experts, dated using forensic ink analysis, and corroborated by digital evidence from your client's computer and phone records. If I had that kind of skill in creating fake evidence, I would have pursued a career in intelligence work rather than running an online boutique. A few people in the gallery actually laughed at that response. The cross-examination continued for 2 more hours, but Kwame's lawyer couldn't shake my testimony. Every accusation he made was met with documented proof. Every attempt to paint me as vindictive was countered with evidence of genuine criminal behavior. When I finally stepped down from the witness stand, I felt lighter than I had in over a year. I told my truth, and the world had listened. The next witness was Adjoa. My sister had changed dramatically over the past months. The confident, stylish woman who'd stolen my husband was gone, replaced by someone who looked haunted by guilt and fear. She was visibly pregnant now, 6 months along, and her testimony was all the more powerful because of it. "I want the court to know that I'm not proud of what I did," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I betrayed my sister, broke up her family, and helped criminals steal from the people of Ghana. But I'm here today because I want to make sure my unborn child grows up in a world where people like Kwame Mensah and Heinrich Muller can't destroy families without consequences." She detailed her recruitment into the money laundering scheme, her manipulation by Kwame, and most damaging of all, her first-hand knowledge of the meetings where my murder was planned. "He talked about it so casually," she testified, "as if discussing what to have for lunch. He said Adjoa was becoming a problem that needed to be permanently resolved." When I asked what that meant, Heinrich Muller explained that they had contacts in human trafficking who could make her disappear without leaving a trail. "And how did you respond to this?" the prosecutor asked. I was horrified. Whatever I had done, whatever mistakes I had made, I could never be part of hurting my sister or her children. That's when I knew I had to help her expose them. When Heinrich Muller's lawyer cross-examined Adjoa, he made the mistake of trying to intimidate her. "Miss Courting, isn't it true that you're testifying against my client only because you were offered immunity from prosecution?" "I'm testifying because your client planned to murder my sister and sell her into slavery," Adjoa responded with more strength than I'd heard from her in months. "If that doesn't horrify you, then you're as evil as he is." Judge Mensah had to bang her gavel to restore order after that exchange. The trial continued for 6 more days. Expert witnesses testified about the forensic evidence. Bank officials detailed the money trails. International law enforcement agents described Heinrich Muller's connections to criminal organizations across 3 continents. But the most dramatic moment came when Heinrich Muller himself took the stand in his own defense. He was a cold, calculating man who showed no remorse for his crimes. Under questioning, he painted himself as a legitimate businessman who'd been unfairly targeted by overzealous prosecutors. Then Patricia Osei began her cross-examination. "Mr. Muller, are you familiar with the Johannesburg trafficking network?" "I've heard of it." "Are you aware that your financial records show regular payments to organizations connected to that network?" "I have many business interests. I can't be expected to research the background of every company I invest in." "Including companies that specialize in kidnapping women and children for forced labor?" "That's a disgusting accusation with no basis in fact." Patricia walked to the evidence table and picked up a thick folder. "Mr. Muller, I'm showing you evidence seized from your Cape Town office. Email exchanges between you and known human traffickers, discussing acquisition targets and disposal methods. Would you like to explain these communications?" For the first time, Heinrich Muller's composure cracked. "Those emails are taken out of context." What context would make discussing the kidnapping and trafficking of human beings acceptable, Mr. Muller? He had no answer. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the 4 women stood to deliver the verdict with a voice that rang clear across the silent courtroom. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of human trafficking conspiracy, guilty. On the charge of money laundering, guilty. On the charge of government corruption, guilty. The verdicts continued for all defendants on all charges. Kwame received 25 years in prison. Dr. Asidu got 30 years. The other government officials received sentences ranging from 15 to 20 years. Heinrich Müller was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge read the sentences, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that night at the wedding. Peace. Not happiness. This wasn't a happy ending. My children would grow up without their father, though that might ultimately be a blessing. The corruption network had been destroyed, but not before stealing millions from the Ghanaian people. But it was justice. Complete, total, uncompromising justice. After the court session ended, as I walked down the courthouse steps surrounded by reporters and photographers, someone called my name. Adjoa. I turned to see Kwame, flanked by prison guards, being led to the transport van. Our eyes met one last time, and for a moment, I saw the man I'd once loved buried beneath the layers of corruption and betrayal. "I'm sorry," he mouthed silently. I stood there watching as they loaded him into the van, thinking about the life we'd once planned together, the dreams we'd shared, the children we'd created in love before everything went wrong. Then I turned away and walked toward the car where my mother was waiting with Kofi, Adjoa, and baby Nyara. My children, healthy, safe, and free. That was all that mattered now. The nightmare was finally over. Or so I thought. As we drove away from the courthouse, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The trial is over, but the war continues. Some of us are still free, and we have long memories. This isn't finished. My blood ran cold. But then I looked at my children in the rearview mirror and felt that familiar surge of protective fury. Let them come. I'd faced down corrupt politicians, international criminals, and human traffickers. I wasn't running anymore. This is so intense. Do you think the threats will ever stop? What would you do in Adjoa's situation? Like if you're proud of how she handled everything, and comment your thoughts below. Don't miss the final chapter. Subscribe and hit that notification bell. 5 years later, I stood on the balcony of my new home in Cantonments, watching the sun set over Accra as my children played in the garden below. Nyara, now an energetic 5-year-old, was chasing 11-year-old Kofi around the mango tree, while 9-year-old Adjoa read a book under the shade of the patio umbrella. Life had been good to us since the trial ended. The Ghanaian government had awarded me a substantial settlement for my role in exposing the corruption network. Money that had allowed me to purchase this beautiful home and secure my children's education through university. My online boutique had evolved into a successful fashion company with 3 physical stores across Accra, employing 12 people and specializing in empowering designs for professional women. Most importantly, my children were thriving. Kofi had grown into a thoughtful, protective young man who helped care for his sisters with a maturity beyond his years. Adjoa was brilliant, already reading at a high school level and talking about becoming a lawyer to help people like Mama did. And Nyara, my miracle baby who'd fought for life in the NICU, was a force of nature who seemed determined to squeeze every ounce of joy out of each day. They rarely asked about their father anymore. Time and healing had helped them understand that some adults make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love, and that it's not the fault of the children when that happens. "Mama," Nyara called from the garden. "Come play with us." "In a minute, sweetheart," I called back, smiling at her infectious enthusiasm. My phone rang, and I recognized the number immediately. Grace, who had become not just my lawyer, but one of my closest friends. "Adjoa, are you watching GTV News?" "No, why?" "Turn it on. Now." I walked inside and switched on the television in the living room. The evening news anchor was reporting on what appeared to be a major international law enforcement operation. In coordination with Interpol and the FBI, authorities have arrested 17 individuals connected to what investigators are calling one of the largest human trafficking networks ever uncovered. The operation, dubbed Freedom Chain, has resulted in the rescue of over 200 victims across 6 countries and the seizure of assets worth more than $50 million. The screen showed footage of arrests in various countries, men in expensive suits being handcuffed and led away by police officers. Then I saw a face that made my heart stop. A man I recognized from photographs in Heinrich Müller's files. someone who'd been at the periphery of the corruption network, someone who'd escaped prosecution during the original trials. The breakthrough came, the anchor continued, when authorities were able to trace financial connections originally uncovered during Ghana's landmark corruption trial 5 years ago. Evidence provided by whistleblower Adjoa led investigators to previously unknown aspects of the criminal network, including international human trafficking operations. I sat down heavily on the sofa, overwhelmed by the realization that the evidence I'd risked everything to gather was still helping to bring criminals to justice 5 years later. Grace was still on the phone. "Did you see that? Your testimony from the original trial provided the foundation for this entire international investigation. You've helped save hundreds of people, Adjoa." I had no idea the investigation was still ongoing. Most of it was classified. But the authorities have been following money trails and connections for years, slowly building cases against the international arms of the network. What you started in Ghana has now toppled criminal organizations on 3 continents. That evening, after the children were in bed, I sat in my home office reviewing the latest quarterly reports for my business. The boutique was doing better than I'd ever dreamed possible, and I was considering opening a 4th location in Kumasi. There was a soft knock on my door, and Kofi appeared in the doorway. "Mama, can we talk?" "Of course, sweetheart. Come in." He settled into the chair across from my desk, the same chair where he'd done his homework for the past 5 years, where we'd had countless conversations about school, friends, and life. "I saw the news today," he said. "About the arrests." I nodded. "What did you think about it?" "I think you're a hero," he said simply. "I know you don't like it when people call you that, but it's true. You saved a lot of people." "I was just trying to protect our family." "I know. But you could have just taken us and run away. Instead, you stayed and fought so that other families wouldn't get hurt too." The maturity in his voice amazed me sometimes. This young man had been shaped by experiences that no child should have to endure, yet he'd emerged stronger and more compassionate because of them. "There's something else I wanted to tell you," he continued. "I got a letter today. From prison." My stomach dropped. "From your father?" He nodded. "He wants to see me. All of us. He says he's found God, that he's a changed man, that he wants to make amends." I studied my son's face carefully. "How do you feel about that?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to see him, to understand why he did what he did. But part of me is angry that he thinks he can just say sorry and everything will be okay. You don't have to decide right now. And whatever you decide, I'll support you." "What would you do?" I thought about that for a long moment. "Honestly, I don't know either. Your father hurt our family in ways that can never be completely healed. But he's still your father, and you have the right to have a relationship with him if you choose to." "Do you think people can really change?" "I think people can change their behavior if they're truly committed to it. But I also think you have to protect yourself and not put yourself in situations where you could be hurt again." Kofi was quiet for a moment. "I think I want to write him back. Not to visit yet, but to ask him some questions. To understand." "That sounds very mature. And if you ever want to talk about what he writes back, I'm here." After Kofi went to bed, I found myself thinking about forgiveness and redemption, about the possibility of change and the necessity of protection. 5 years ago, I would have said that Kwame was irredeemably evil. Now I wasn't so sure. People were complex, capable of both great cruelty and genuine transformation. But whether he'd changed or not, the consequences of his actions remained. Our children had grown up without a father. I'd spent years looking over my shoulder, fearing for our safety. Hundreds of people had been harmed by the corruption network he'd helped create. Some things couldn't be forgiven, even if they could be understood. The next morning brought unexpected news. Commander Asante called to inform me that the last members of Heinrich Muller's network had been arrested in a pre-dawn raid in Lagos. The international investigation was finally complete. "It's over," he said. "Truly over. The threats against you and your family are finished." For the first time in 5 years, I allowed myself to believe that we were completely safe. That afternoon, I was in my store in OSU when a familiar figure walked through the door. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. She was thinner, older, wearing simple clothes instead of the designer outfits I remembered. But when she looked up at me with tears in her eyes, I knew immediately who she was. Adjoa, my sister. She'd served 3 years in prison despite her cooperation with authorities, emerging just 6 months ago. Her daughter, Kwame's daughter, was now 4 years old and being raised by Adjoa's mother in Takoradi. Adjoa, she said, her voice uncertain. I know I have no right to be here, but I needed to see you. I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulative woman who destroyed my marriage. Instead, I saw someone who looked genuinely broken and remorseful. How did you find me? Your success story has been in all the newspapers. The woman who brought down corruption and built a business empire. She looked around at my store. The beautiful displays, the bustling customers, the employees helping shoppers find the perfect outfits. You've done amazingly well. What do you want, Adjoa? I want to apologize. Not just for sleeping with your husband, but for everything. For betraying your trust, for helping him steal from you, for putting your children at risk. Her voice broke. I know I can never make up for what I did, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. I looked at this woman who'd once been my closest confidant, my partner in childhood mischief, my maid of honor. Prison had clearly changed her, just as the past 5 years had changed me. I forgave you a long time ago, I said quietly. Not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying that anger was poisoning me and affecting my children. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't about what people deserve. It's about what we need to do to heal and move forward. We stood there in silence for a moment, 2 women who'd been through hell and somehow survived. I want you to know, Adjoa said finally, that I've told my daughter about you. About her cousins. When she's older, if she wants to meet them, I hope you'll consider it. She's innocent in all of this. Of course, she can know her family. Before leaving, Adjoa bought a dress for my store, a simple blue piece that represented new beginnings. As she walked out the door, I felt a chapter of my life finally closing. That evening, I gathered my children on the living room sofa for a family meeting. I have some news to share with you all, I began. The bad men who threatened our family have all been arrested. We don't have to be afraid anymore. Does that mean we can travel? Adjoa asked excitedly. She'd been wanting to visit London, where one of her favorite authors lived. Yes, we can travel wherever we want. Can we visit Daddy? Naira asked innocently. She barely remembered Kwame, but she'd heard her older siblings talking about him. That's something we'll have to think about and discuss as a family, I said carefully. Your father has been in prison because he made very bad choices. But if any of you want to see him someday, when you're ready, we can talk about it. I don't want to see him, Adjoa said firmly. He hurt you, Mama. He hurt all of us. I might want to, Kofi said quietly. Not now, but maybe when I'm older, just to understand. And that's okay too, I assured him. We each get to make our own decisions about forgiveness and relationships. As we talked, I realized that this conversation marked the end of one phase of our lives and the beginning of another. For 5 years, we'd been defined by what had happened to us, the betrayal, the corruption, the trial, the threats. Now we could be defined by what we chose to do next. 2 weeks later, I stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Ghana, delivering the keynote speech at a conference on women's empowerment and economic development. In the audience were business leaders, government officials, and young women who saw my story as proof that it was possible to overcome even the most devastating circumstances. 5 years ago, I was a woman with no home, no money, and no hope. I had a newborn baby fighting for life in the ICU, 2 young children who didn't understand why their father had abandoned them, and powerful enemies who wanted to destroy me completely. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Today, I stand before you as the owner of a successful business that employs dozens of people, the mother of 3 thriving children, and a woman who helped bring down one of the largest corruption networks in Ghana's history. I'm not telling you this to boast, but to demonstrate that no matter how dark your circumstances seem, no matter how powerful your enemies appear to be, You have within you the strength to overcome anything." The applause was thunderous, but what meant the most to me were the young women who approached me afterward with their own stories of struggle and dreams of success. One young woman, probably about the age I'd been when I married Kwame, grabbed my hand with tears in her eyes. "My husband left me when I was diagnosed with diabetes," she whispered. "He said he couldn't handle being married to a sick woman. I thought my life was over." "Your life is just beginning," I told her firmly. "The end of a bad marriage isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your freedom to write a better one." As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me from that devastating night at my cousin's wedding to this moment of triumph and purpose. The path had been painful, dangerous, and often terrifying. But it had also been transformative. I wasn't the same woman who discovered her husband's betrayal 5 years ago. That woman had been dependent, trusting to a fault, willing to sacrifice her own needs for the sake of keeping peace. This woman was independent, cautious, but not cynical, and absolutely unwilling to compromise her children's safety or her own dignity for anyone. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had ultimately made me stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. When I arrived home, I found all 3 of my children waiting up for me, eager to hear about the speech. "Did you tell them about how you snuck into the house to get the evidence?" Naira asked excitedly. "Did you tell them about the trial?" Adjoa wanted to know. "Did you tell them that you're our hero?" Kofi asked with a smile. "I told them that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can lead to the best things that happen to us," I said, pulling all 3 of them into a hug. "And that family isn't just the people you're born with. It's the people who choose to love and support each other no matter what." As I tucked them into bed that night, I realized that this moment of peace, safety, and love was what victory looked like. Not the courtroom verdict, not the newspaper headlines, not the business success. This quiet evening with my children, all of us healthy and happy and free to dream about the future. Kwame had tried to destroy me, but he'd only succeeded in revealing how strong I really was. His betrayal had been the end of my old life, but it had also been the beginning of my new one. And my new life was beautiful. The next morning, I woke up to sunshine streaming through my bedroom windows and the sound of my children laughing in the garden. I had no husband to worry about, no criminals threatening my family, no corruption network to expose. Just a successful business to run, 3 amazing children to raise, and a future full of infinite possibilities. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. And freedom, I had learned, was worth fighting for. What an incredible journey. This story shows us that no matter how dark things get, we have the strength to overcome anything. Hit like if Adjoa's story inspired you. Subscribe for more powerful stories like this, and comment below. What was your favorite moment in this amazing tale of survival and justice? Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than they know. Thank you for watching Tales by Ben, where every story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to write a better ending.